Okay, you are live.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you for volunteering to be on this General Assembly Compensation Committee. Philip and I have been working over the last few months on getting prepped for this, and took a little bit longer, I think, to get some of the appointments, but happy to be kicking this off here. And we have a mid-January target date to get everything to our constituents. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Philip right now. I will first let me introduce myself. My name is Marco Priola. I'm the chair here of the committee. And I'll turn it over to Philip. You can do an introduction and then maybe we can go around and give a little bit more of my bio. But if you just want to go over some logistics for us here today, and then we can quick do some introductions with everybody.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Philip Anthony, Department of Legislative Services. I'll be acting as lead staff to the commission. I'm joined by a few of my colleagues. I've been with the department for 13 years now. My primary function is staffing the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee. And my main policy focus is on state pensions and retirement. I'm joined by Simon Powell and Jason Kramer from the department as well, and I'll turn it over to them to give a brief introduction.
Sure. Thanks, Philip. Simon Powell. This is the fifth time I've staffed the General Assembly Compensation Commission. I've been with the department for about 34 years, mainly in the budget function. And this is the last thing that I'll be doing for the department before I retire. So looking forward to it.
Hello, I'm Jason Kramer. This is my first time staffing the Compensation Commission, so I've got a long ways to go to catch Simon. I'm a budget analyst here at DLS. I primarily work with personnel and pension issues. And with that, I don't know how you want to do the rest of the members. Philip.
I guess if members just want to speak up, or Mr. Chair, if you wanted to say anything additional.
Yeah, I'll just give a little bit of background myself, and then people can speak up. My name's, like I said, Marco Priola. This is actually the first time I've been on this commission. I've held other appointments through the governor's office in the past, but my full-time job, I'm the CFO over at Upper Chesapeake Health, University of Maryland, Upper Chesapeake Health in Bel Air and Harford County. Been there for about a year now. So.
I'll go. I am Kimberly Prescott, and I am the owner of an outsourced human resources firm called Prescott HR. We're based in Columbia, Maryland.
I'm Matt Gallagher, President and CEO of the Goldsecker Foundation in Baltimore, former state government employee appointed by Senate President Ferguson.
Wendell, did you want to go?
Yes. Wendell Rakowski, this is my second term on the commission. Looking forward to getting to participate again. I spent 40 years in human resources. The first 20 years was in compensation, and the last 20 years was in HR strategy, let's just say that. And I'm retired now and just doing a little part-time consulting.
Nice to meet you. Lester?
Yeah, thank you. So Lester Davis, happy to be here, and also Simon, happy to be here on your last go around. Hopefully, we'll make you proud. I currently work as vice president at a public affairs firm, but before that, was a deputy chief of staff in the mayor's office in Baltimore City, where I interface with the General Assembly quite often as the city's chief and head lobbyist.
Nice to meet you, Lester.
Yes, Lawrence Daniels. This is my second time on the commission. I'm an attorney. I live in Mitchellville, Maryland, and I've spent a majority of my career as a consumer advocate attorney.
I can go. I'm Lynn Ann Dipple, and I am an attorney and CFP with Bay Point Wealth. It's a private wealth management firm, and I'm a principal there. And this is also my second time on the commission.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Latosha Frank Harrison. This is my first time on the commission. I am a proud Prince George's County resident, and full-time, I'm a procurement analyst at General Services Administration.
That everyone, Phil? We have a couple dialed in, it looks like. Anybody
Yeah,
else dialed in?
Some additional people. Commissioner Whitson, I think.
Michael Whitson, can you hear me? I'm having some audio issues with you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, that's fine. I'm Michael Whitson. This is my first time on the commission. I have a land title abstracting business in Southern Maryland and no experience with this before, but looking forward to it. I've done some transportation issue things for the General Assembly and some critical areas legislation stuff, but I'm looking forward to this. This will be interesting, and we'll rely on the kindness of our staff to bring along people like me. Thanks.
And then, yeah, Mr. Chair, just a few additional people on here. Dana Tagalikod from Department of Legislative Services. She's a former staff to the commission and current manager in the legislative function in our department. And then Ann Gothrop from the State Retirement and Pension System Retirement Agency. She is the Legislative Affairs Director. And here, in case there's any technical questions, if you want to proceed to kind of lay out the agenda and give the roadmap before we get into it.
Yeah, sure. And thank you, staff, for, I should have thanked you all to start with. Thank you all for all the work that you've already done to date. And I'm glad to hear that we have some veterans on the commission. This is my first time. So if you need to get me in line, just let me know if I missed something, or I'll rely on some of your veteran knowledge to help assist us here, though. So Philip, if you want to kick us off, if you want to kick the agenda off, and I believe we're walking through a lot of the exhibits today, and it'll be a lot of information for us. And then we'll have 2 follow-up meetings. One's already on the books, and then a second one, or a third one that we're trying to get in person so that we can do some of the signatures and things like that. So yeah, so if you want to walk us through.
Sure. Just a little housekeeping. Just to remind everyone, the meetings are the virtual meetings are being streamed live and recorded. We will at some point open up a portal and leave a note for opportunity for the public to submit written testimony to the commission, which we'll gather and forward on to you as that comes in. We'll be going over the background materials today, number of exhibits regarding commission's charge and historical data, information on legislative functions, salaries, benefits, and expenses. We'll have some time for discussion, and then we can identify any follow-up for a future meeting, and work to get that, see if we can get that third meeting set up on the books. The next meeting we'll be having will dive a little deeper into some of the technical components of the legislative pension plan. But for this first meeting, we're going to focus more on kind of the overview of the compensation, commission charge, and everything you all be generally responsible for. So with that, I think we can jump into the exhibits, and let me share my screen. Is that good for everybody?
Yeah, fine.
All right. So the first exhibit we have here is just, this is the constitutional provision establishing the commission, outlining the commission's charge. As a responsive duty of the commission, compensation and allowances paid to members of the General Assembly shall be established by this commission. The commission accomplishes this task, and most of the operative language is here in this third paragraph, by formal resolution that it will need to submit within 15 days of the beginning of the regular session of the General Assembly, which will start this January. The commission will submit its recommendations by formal resolution for the compensation and allowances. The General Assembly, after receipt of that, may reduce or reject, but may not increase anything established in the resolution. So the resolution, the provisions you set, that's the ceiling that the General Assembly is gonna have to work with. The General Assembly can make those modifications or allow the resolution to take effect. One thing is, the rates of compensation are required to be uniform for all of the members of the General Assembly, except that officers of the Senate and House can be designated to receive higher compensation, which has historically been the case for the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. With that, we'll be jumping into some information on legislative compensation process, legislative functions and salaries. I'm going to turn that over to Simon to go through the next batch of exhibits.
Thanks, Philip. You can just move it on. So this map basically just tells you how compensation for legislators are set in other states. 27 are the legislature sets their own salaries. 14 are set by a compensation commission like yourself. In some cases, there are other actions that are tied to that. For example, in Arizona, the commission makes recommendations, but they have to be ratified by the voters. Maryland doesn't do that, although, as Philip said, the legislature can modify or reject any commission actions. And, in the last 5 years, I have been staff where you all have gone through the process and done your due diligence, made recommendations, and the legislature has rejected everything because by the time it got to the session, things didn't look so good in the economy and nobody wanted an increase. So that happens. But I will tell you that by and large, the recommendations of the commission are treated extremely seriously and invariably are upheld. I would note that there are 7 states that actually tie legislative salaries to an index, such as the CPI, state employee compensation, median household income, or a basket of salaries from other states. We don't do that, but if you are inclined to increase compensation and increase salaries, you can use those measures as a guide to perhaps how you might want to do an increase. There are some restrictions on that. You cannot tie, for example, legislative salaries to future increases for state employees, which is a kind of something that you might think would be a good one. You can't do that because the legislature has control over those salaries in the budget process. So there are limits to what to that. So you're not allowed to set it to that. But you can certainly use a variety of other ways to tie salary increases if you are so inclined. There are a couple of states that actually set their salaries in the Constitution. And I will just warn you, if you do that, states tend to find that they're very difficult to change. And some of those salaries have been the same for a considerable amount of time. Moving on to the next slide, very quickly, Philip's already mentioned this, but basically the legislature has 3 options to again, reinforcing what Philip said, 3 things they can do with anything that you do as a commission. They can adopt your recommendations, and they can do that by taking no action or actually affirming it. They can modify your recommendations, but as Philip said, they cannot increase any compensation. And thirdly, they can reject the commission's recommendations in toto. As I said, that has happened once in the last five goes around, but that was mainly because the recommendations were made right before the Great Recession. And between the timing of the commission's recommendations and the start of the session in January, the economy basically tanked. If you move on to the 4th exhibit, I'm not going to go through this, but this exhibit, which goes on for several pages, just gives you a rundown of all the changes that have happened, all the salaries that have been in place since 1970. And just keep going through this, Philip, until we get to exhibit 5. This is probably more useful because this actually gives you a sense right now in the 2000 resolution of what the actual compensation is. So you can see you have the salaries for the members, the president and the speaker. You have all the different expense standards and so forth as you go through this exhibit. I'm not going to go through it in detail because we can go through some of these things in the presentation. But this basically contains a pretty simple summary of what the current compensation and expenses are for the legislature.
And I'll hop in briefly on Exhibit 6. This is an exhibit showing the number of bills and joint resolutions introduced and passed over the past 30 or so years. As you can see, historically, there's been it's been fairly steady. There's been an increase recently. I would note that for the 2021 session, this Senate number here, how it looks like it dipped down. The Senate did actually introduce some limitations on the number of bills that members could introduce. And so this dip, I would just point that out here, that it's not necessarily a decrease in the workload. One thing I would note, just anecdotally in my experience as a legislative drafter and committee staff, bills can be incredibly complex. We do get the general sense that the complexity has been increasing in prior years up until recently, and the legislature has dealt with a number of very high-profile, large pieces of legislation over the past number of sessions. Additionally, I would also point out that the budget process has been a very large undertaking, and in the next term, by constitutional amendment, there will be a new process that will be implemented for the legislature's handling of the budget, which is anticipated to increase the workload and attention needed to pass that, in addition to the already very large undertaking that is. And then I would turn it back over to Simon for Exhibit 7.
Thanks, Philip. I would point out that the fact that the budget's going to get more complicated is not the reason I'm retiring, but it's a happy coincidence. I think what we're trying to show, and what in this section, we're trying to give you a sense of, because this is the question that often comes up and is asked by the commission, which is basically, how much does a legislature work? Are we a full-time legislature, or do people literally just work those 90 days that people know about during session? And I think it's kind of important to note, as Philip said, that not only is the work getting more complicated during session, but the work is getting more complicated out of session. But we don't have good measures of how much legislators actually work in terms of their hours. We don't have data on that. So I'm just going to throw that out there, but that's one of the issues that people generally in your position ask is, are we paying these folks for 3 months of the year, or are we paying them for much more work? So what we can do, though, at least, is show you some data that we've collected from various sources, the first of which is from the National Conference of State Legislatures, NCSL, which is kind of the National Governing Association equivalent for legislative bodies in the US. And they basically use data around estimated time on the job, which is self-reported, salary compensation of legislators, staffing levels, and session lengths to come up with a broad categorization of what a legislature is, whether it's considered full-time, and there are a couple of kind of distinctions there, part-time, and then hybrid, which is kind of like a middle ground. So, for example, if legislators report spending more time on the job, they have proportionally higher legislative salaries, they have more professional staff, and they have longer sessions, we would consider those more full-time. Maryland comes in the middle ground. It's considered a hybrid, but I would note that it falls at the higher end in terms of the salary compensation. And for professional staff, we're kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of how many professional staff we actually have. If you look at the next slide, Philip, this gives you a sense of, for example, the staffing levels at legislatures across the US. First exhibit looks at permanent staff per legislator, and this ranges from almost 18 in California. These are year-round permanent staff, same as Philip, Jason, myself, and that goes down to 0.26 in North Dakota. The average is about 3.5. Maryland's just about at that, but you can see that really there's some outliers: California, New York, Texas, Pennsylvania, Florida. They tend to, they're in the kind of upper left-hand quadrant of this exhibit. They're kind of like the high end in terms of the number of permanent staff. Most of the others are kind of like falling in a gentle gentle slope below that level. If you add together the next slide, the total legislative staff per legislator, this includes session-only employees. Generally, some of the states that don't have a lot of permanent staff will use more session employees. But again, the range is from California, which is up there at, again at 17.5, down to New Hampshire. Maryland again in the middle of the pack. Turn to the next slide, Exhibit 10. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This just gives you a sense of what people think of when they think of a citizen legislature, which is what Maryland has always considered itself, versus a professional legislature. I would note that a lot of the characteristics of a professional legislature, I see that more and more in Maryland. So, there is a lot, as Philip says, there's a lot more complexity, and people spend a lot more time on issues, not just in session, but outside of session. So I think, we are definitely moving towards that professionalized legislature, although, the moniker of a citizen legislature is still something that Maryland generally has been clinging to. Next exhibit, this is a different analysis of legislative professionalism and whether the state legislatures are considered, professional. This is different from the NCSL. I just threw this in there because this is one of the few academic works that looks at that. It compares legislative pay, days in session, staff per legislature, and it compares it to the US Congress. Now, put aside what anybody thinks about the US Congress, they do have a lot of staff per legislature. They are paid relatively well, and they are in session year round. So they would be ranked a 1 on this index, and a 0 would be considered being completely non-professional in comparison. Again, Maryland ranks below all of the what so-called full-time legislatures, according to NCSL, but we are at the top of that kind of hybrid pool. So, that's kind of gives you a sense of, I think, of where Maryland is in terms of its how the work gets done and how it looks at itself. We're not full-time, and a lot of people are very proud of that in terms of the legislators, but we are very much at the top end of the next band of legislatures, which is with a solid professional staff, relatively high salary, and relatively high workload. Exhibit 12 just gives you a sense. We try to update this. Unfortunately, the NCSL data wasn't updated, just to give you a sense of how many people in Maryland versus other legislatures consider themselves full-time. Maryland does have about 15% of legislators who consider themselves full-time. This is self-reported data again. That compares to about 11% nationally. I think that gives you a sense that, again, that Maryland, there is a cadre of people who are able to work full-time as legislators on the legislative salary, but it's a very small cadre. Most people have got other employment or other income from different sources. Exhibit 13 gives you a sense of, we often ask, well, if the salary isn't enough, is it attractive to serve in the legislature? It's very difficult to kind of get at that question. I would note that there is significant turnover during every election cycle. This gives you the data in terms of the turnover. Really, what you want to look at is the last column, which because there's often a lot of movement between the House and the Senate. So that's kind of like voluntary turnover. You can see that it ranges from election cycle to election cycle in terms of the number of people who leave the legislature. It tends to be a little higher in the election cycle immediately after redistricting. So you'd expect, for example, to see in 2022 that number going up. But again, part of the problem with this is it really doesn't answer the question about why people leave. I would note that in the last election cycle, far fewer people were defeated in elections than left. Most people left for a variety of other reasons, running for different offices, just doing something different. So, we don't have any difficulty filling seats. There's always people who want to run. But it's always very difficult to know whether people are leaving because of concerns about salaries and the need to create improve their salaries from a family perspective. Moving to the next slide, Exhibit 14. This gives you a sense, because election year turnover doesn't capture all the movement within the legislature, just gives you a sense of the current legislative tenure in the two bodies. This is in the Senate. And essentially, in the Senate, as you can see, a lot of people have got prior House service. You won't see this in the next slide for the House, but so you've got people who've served in the House and then served in the Senate. From this chart, you can see that about 40% of the Senate served less than 2 terms. So they've got less than 8 years experience. That's combined House and Senate experience. And 7 or 15% have less than 1 term. This is actually more stark in the next exhibit in the House. I put this together in September and I was kind of surprised. 96 members, or almost 70% of the House, has served less than 2 terms. 37% less than 1 term. I went back and looked to see what this compared to in 2014 to see if the situation was markedly different. And in fact, it is. In the Senate, there was only about 9 senators in 2014 that served less than 2 terms, about 19%, so half the level of today. In the House, it was 62 or 42%, again, considerably lower than the current tenure. Again, what does that tell you? Again, it's difficult to know, but it does indicate that there's a lot of turnover in the legislature, especially in the last couple of terms. Exhibit 16, we actually start talking about the actual data in terms of salaries. This chart is drawn from NCSL. It lists all the legislative salaries in 2021 for different states, their session characteristics in terms of term length of term, as well as a little note which tells you whether the salary have increased since 2017. And I'll come back to that in a slide in a minute. We've basically, in this chart, we've highlighted the states that are considered full-time by NCSL. And you can see that with the exception of, Washington and Alabama, Maryland comes in at 3rd in terms of the non-full-time states in terms of salary. The next slide is Exhibit 17. This just is the same data, except it just gives it on a relative basis, comparing it to other legislatures. Maryland, again, is 13th, again, below all the full-time legislatures, and Washington and Alabama. We have actually declined in terms of our rankings slightly since 2006, gone from 10th to 13th. But still, we're at the upper end in terms of the salary in terms of compared to other hybrid type states. Exhibit 18, I did want to point this one out. To me, this was probably the most interesting thing. As I said at the beginning, I've been doing this for 5 commissions, beginning in 2006. And this go around, when I looked back at the 2017 salaries and compared it to the most recent salaries for legislatures, this was by far the largest change, the number of states that had changed in salaries in the last 4 years that I'd ever seen. Half the states have seen salary changes in the last 4 years. New York, as you can clearly see, significant salary increases. And I would note that New York's legislators were on track to get another, I think it was a $30,000 increase over their 21 salary. But they put that off because of the pandemic, when it looked like budgets were falling apart. Otherwise, that increase would have been even more significant. As you can see, all of the states listed here have had increases, whether, some of the percentage increases are pretty significant. It struck me that some of those states that I've been seeing for the last 15, 16 years that were always on the bottom end in terms of their low salaries, they were actually starting to give salary increases in some cases for the first time in a couple of decades. Only one state actually decreased legislative salaries. That was Georgia. And I have to say that was the first time I'd actually seen a legislature cut their salary in my 5 goes around of this commission. But I think, this slide will give you a sense that there has been a significant effort in at least half of the states to increase salaries in the last 4 years. The next slide we have is just to give you a sense of what legislative salaries are in states with budgets that are similar to Maryland's. And there's not a lot of clarity that you get from this analysis, really. With those states with salaries higher than Maryland's, only 3 have smaller budgets. So it really isn't a good gauge using the budget as a budgeted amount as where salaries should be. But we threw this in there because I think in a couple of commissions ago, somebody asked for this data, but it doesn't really, I don't think it's particularly illuminating. Okay, I think that's me for the moment, Philip.
Yeah, the next batch of exhibits Jason's going to walk us through.
Thank you. So starting with Exhibit 20, this next batch of exhibits hopefully will help to put into context legislator salaries compared to state employee salaries, Maryland resident salaries, and other constitutional officer salaries. So you can sort of see where legislators fit into a larger picture. This exhibit on the right-hand side shows legislator salaries over the past 20 or so years. And on the left-hand side, it shows state employee general salary increases over the past 20 or so years. And in general, you can see that legislator salaries don't really keep pace with state employee salaries, especially over the last 4 years or so, where state employees have gotten about 10% increase in salaries over the last 4 years, while legislators' salaries have been flat. On the next exhibit, similar information with just more detail on state employee salaries. The sort of third column here from the left is what you saw in the last exhibit, but not every state employee gets the same salary increases. People in the state law enforcement officers union, that's the middle column there, have gotten negotiated increments as part of their collective bargaining agreements and much larger salary increases. I think it's about 16 or 17% total over the last 4 years or so. And we can move on to the next exhibit. Actually, there's a lot of footnotes on that one. So if you really want to get into the details of state employee salaries, there's a lot of information there. This exhibit shows other state constitutional officers, members of the judiciary, and cabinet secretaries, what their salaries have been over the last 8 years. There's another commission that's working on recommendations for these positions. As you can see, the constitutional officers have not had a salary increase over the last 4 years. And that's created some odd things where the deputy AG, the deputy comptroller, and the deputy treasurer are all making more than their bosses. But the commission that's in charge of these salaries is likely to be recommending some significant increases. I believe they're going to recommend the governor be increased to $195,000, the lieutenant governor, the AG, the controller, and the treasurer all up to $175,000, and the secretary of state up to $120,000. The judiciary sets their own salaries for judges, I believe. And then we can go down to the next page. Back one. These are the cabinet secretaries, and as you can see, they're mostly in line with what state employees have been receiving as a percentage increase for the most part, about 9% or so over the last 4 years, with a few exceptions. The next exhibit is the next 3 exhibits. I'm just going to zip through real quick. These are local legislative salaries for commissioners at the county level. And the next exhibit is city council members and chairs by county. And the next exhibit is mayors and county executives. And as you might expect, they mostly correlate with population size in those jurisdictions, with a few exceptions. The next exhibit, so that was sort of putting legislative salaries in the context of other public officials. This can put it into the context of the state, the median household or the average worker in the state. You can look by jurisdiction if you're interested in more detail, but in general, the median household is about $86,000. Per capita income is about $64,000 in the state. And I think I'm going to turn over to Simon for a few exhibits now. Simon, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. These exhibits are, the idea here is to show you, as Jason did, if you are inclined to increase salaries, to give you kind of some sense of, well, how would you do that as a commission? And there are, as Jason said, you could look at the state employee increases over the past 4 years. We know that's what other states do. As I mentioned earlier, some states tie things as a percent of state median household income. And I think this chart shows you, for example, what the legislative salary is as a percent of median household income. It's about just under 60%. There's a lot of notes on this and how this was derived. But basically, it shows you that here Maryland's legislative salary tends to be towards the middle of the pack as a percent of state median household income, because while it is a relatively high legislative salary compared to other states, we've told you it's in the almost 10 to 13th at this point. Because Maryland has a relatively high state median household income as a percent, it actually is it moves down a little lower. And if you look at Exhibit 28, which is the next exhibit, it does the same thing for per capita income. Again, looking at legislative salaries as a percent of per capita income. Maryland's is a little higher here, it's about 74%, but still towards the middle of the pack relative to per capita income. So, one could argue that, again, if this is where these could be measures where you could kind of like use these as a means of tying the legislative salary moving forward, just to give you an example.
So the next batch of exhibits will deal with member expenses and reimbursements. Exhibit 29 is just showing you kind of an overview of the reimbursements for the past 4 years related to lodging, meals, and mileage. I would note that for reimbursements for these types of items, the legislature has synced up with the Federal General Services Administration rates for reimbursements, things like mileage, lodging, meal per diems. Two things to just note for, I guess, somewhat different than what a typical state employee would get. Members do have ability to have lodging closer to Annapolis for the legislative session. Some, depending on their geography, that commute would be a bit of a nightmare. So there is allowance for them to obtain housing, and then they also have available to them a per diem for their meals, given the nature of the work that occurs during the 90 days. It's kind of tough to squeeze the meals in there every now and then. Exhibit 30, just going to go through these next few pretty quick. This is just showing the usage of the lodging rates. It's averaged about between 20-25 that have not used lodging submissions, as to be expected, given some may live in Annapolis or close by geographically and don't need to utilize that. Exhibit 31, again, showing the just the meal claim utilization. by the amount of the daily limit that is being claimed. Most members are submitting for that. And then Exhibit 32 and 33 are going to show out-of-state travel costs. I will note, just for clarity, you see 2020 and you see this large amount, and then the drop in 21. Our fiscal years start July 1 of the calendar before. So fiscal 2020 would have started July 1, 2019. So given the timing of the pandemic, in case this is jumping out at you, that's what's going on there, and also in Exhibit 33. Next exhibit, I think, Jason, this one's you.
Right, just real briefly, this, in addition to salary, legislators are eligible to participate in the state health insurance plan and prescription and dental plans. And this just shows by chamber and by plan how many members participate. And in general, about 2/3 of the members two-thirds of the legislators are members of the health insurance plans. And the bottom just shows the state subsidy for those plans on a monthly basis. And I'll get into a little bit more detail on this in some later exhibits.
For background, the legislative participation in things like health insurance and other employee fringe benefits is on the same terms as general state employees. Next batch of exhibits is going to deal with the legislative pension plan. As mentioned at the top, we'll dive into some more of the detail at the next meeting, but just as an overview, in Exhibit 35, we have here just the accrued service retirement of the active members. I would note, so this 4 to 8 column, you've got about 56 in there. So to the extent any of them have served, this will be their full second term that they're serving out, they'll hit that 8 years at the end of this term. There may be a few that won't end up hitting that 8-year mark, depending on if they were appointed midterm at some point over the last 2 terms. Exhibit 36, just showing the number of retirees and beneficiaries. There's been a few changes over the years, but this grouping here is going to be retirees that are under the main features of the plan that are currently in place for the past few go rounds of the commission. Exhibit 37 here is kind of the meat and potatoes regarding the legislative pension plan we have here. This is a chart showing kind of the main features of all the various state plans available to employees and comparing them with the legislative plan. So as far as the legislative plan goes, there's 8 years of service to vest, so 2 terms. In 2011, there were significant pension reforms done to all of the employee systems. And so in the 2014 Compensation Commission work, there were changes made in recognition of that to try and align the pension system along the lines of the changes that were made in the other employee systems. And so you'll see at a few points, there'll be a bifurcation of benefits or vesting based on when a member first became a member of the General Assembly. And so as far as employee contributions, the employee contributions were raised to 7%. This would be consistent with the 2 largest plans, the employees and teachers plans. They're both at 7%. As far as service retirement goes, again, here you have that bifurcation of the beginning with the 2015 term. Service retirement age for members predating that date is age 60 or 50 years for a reduced benefit for an early retirement. After that, it was raised to age 62 or age 55. The allowance for the members is based on a multiplier of 3% per year. That so every year a member gets credited with a year of service. It's 3% times the number of years. And then the legislator pension is actually based on the salary of an active member. So typically for the other members of the plans, with the exception of the judges system, if you take an employee or a teacher, for example, they'll work their career, and as their length of service goes out, their salaries will increase over time. And when they retire, their benefit is based on an average of their last few years of salary. The benefit's based on that. A retiree of the legislative plan, that benefit is going to be based on the salary currently being received by a member. The significance of that is that for retirees of the legislative pension plan, they won't see any increases in their retirement benefit unless the salaries of the active members are increased. Whereas the other employees have, in the other employee systems, there are cost of living adjustments based on consumer price index increases. And then just some other basic provisions. You've got disability retirements, and then the legislative pension plan does not have accidental disabilities like the other plans. The next chart, Exhibit 38, this is kind of a overview of various legislative pension plans across the nation. Based on the 20-year benefit, you can see Maryland's ranked 11th. I would note, as I generally advise members regarding pension plans, it's always a little bit iffy when you're trying to compare pension plans. It's tough to get necessarily an apples to apples based on a multitude of factors. But this is showing here what the Maryland benefit is. The Maryland benefit is capped for legislators at 2/3. So when they hit 22 years, I think 4 months of service, their benefit is capped at that 2/3 level. Again, here, just showing a chart with the various member contribution rates. This is the amount that's coming out of the members' compensation that's going towards the retirement system. For Maryland, it was set at 7%. This was in action meant to be consistent with the employee contribution rates for the two largest employee systems, the employees and teachers combined systems, or pension systems, sorry. Next chart here, you have just comparison of the various multipliers. Maryland's on the higher end at 3%, but most are in above a 2% multiplier. This has been in effect for quite a while, the Maryland rate. And then as far as vesting, Maryland's at an 8 years vesting. We do have, again, that bifurcation based on when a member first took office, whether they can start collecting a benefit at age 62 or 60. Oh, sorry. And then I will kick it back over to Jason to talk a little bit about some kind of overview comparison charts we've put together for you.
So this shows all of the compensation for legislators, including retirement contributions and retirement subsidies and insurance subsidies. So you at the top, you have that starting salary of $50,330, and then the fringe benefit payments that come out of the paycheck, including the retirement contribution of 7%, the premium payments for health and dental and prescription insurance. That's the figures used there are just the typical, I guess, legislator. That's different depending on family size. And then the fringe benefits that are paid by the state, which includes the retirement subsidy of the most recent rates for 21.1%, and the subsidies for health insurance and prescription drugs and dental. The difference in the two columns is that the only difference in the two columns is that retirement contributions are capped after 22 years and 3 months of service for legislators. If we can then go on to the next exhibit. And this shows comparing, in the first column, comparing legislative salaries and benefits, which I just discussed, compared to state employees. And as Philip mentioned earlier, there's this bifurcation in 2011 with pension reforms. So you start with that 50,000. If you compare a legislator to a state employee making $50,000 today, this shows the total salary and fringes would be the same for active employees. However, I would note that a legislator who was making $50,330 in 2018, if they were to have gotten the same general salary increases as state employees were getting, they would be making about $55,300 today. Or conversely, that state employee who's making $50,300 today was making only about $45,500 in 2018. So you can definitely compare the same salaries, but over time, the state employee has seen an increase that the legislator has not. Where the difference comes in, if you scroll down, is upon retirement. There are differences in both. Oh, sorry, scroll back up just once. So there's differences in the subsidy by the state for insurance, and then on the next page, the subsidy for health insurance for retirees. And that's all I have on this. I think I'll turn it over back to Philip.
Yep. The last three exhibits are just some background information on member office accounts and staff assistants. These are not items that would be set under the purview of the commission. This is more for background. The commission's charges for the compensation and allowances to the members. But just for some background, we have info on the office accounts, allowances, and then staff assistance for the members. And with that, Mr. Chair, that's all the exhibits we have for this afternoon. And if you wanted to, any members have any questions about any particular exhibits, or if you want to open up for other discussion.
Yeah, I'll open it up for discussion, and then I'll follow up with some particular questions I have. So any of the commissioners have any questions for the staff? An excellent presentation, by the way. That was extremely helpful and very comprehensive.
I just had a question for Jason, just for clarification. And I thought of the question, I think I know the answer already. So the medical coverage is for the whole year, correct? It's not just during the session.
Right.
So if I sign up for this, then the second question is, do the members contribute anything to the medical coverage, or is it fully paid?
It's the same plan basically as a state employee, right? So if it's like exhibit 41 or 42, it's you can see what the annual premiums are.
I couldn't tell from the chart if the member actually contributes to the coverage or not. So
yeah. So that's the $2,300 line there and the $898 line. Those are the total premiums for the year that they're contributing to their health insurance. Yep.
That's all I had.
Yeah, their participation in the fringe benefits, it's on the same level as any other state employee.
Do any of the other commissioners have any questions for the staff?
Hi, this is Latosha. I just have a question just regarding the future intention for data collection on the elements that are unknown. There was a lot of presentation on the turnover and the factors unknown. So I'm just curious as it relates to moving forward. Are there any models being placed to capture that data?
It's a good question. No, we don't we don't do exit interviews for legislators. You can glean what people are, why they're leaving based on their comments when they retire or when they leave, but we don't have any formal data collection about why legislators leave. I mean, we know those who actually lose in the election. But as I said, that's actually a much smaller percentage of those of the turnover. It is one of the difficulties that we've always had as a commission staff, getting you the data that you might need to better answer some of the questions, especially with regard to the time commitment. In the past, we've had some anecdotal data. Members will actually come and testify to the commission and talk about the fact that they feel like it's a full-time job, but it's not enough of a salary for them as a career. but we don't actually have that data and that data collection. It would be something that would have to be done more formally from the presiding officers and themselves, and we haven't done that at this point.
Simon, I just want to give a general observation on while we were talking about that. From a raw numbers, it looked like it was about a 7% annualized turnover rate. Although if I was head of the HR department, I wouldn't be proud of a 7% turnover rate, but it's not alarming, if you know what I'm saying. It's not like, oh my God, everybody's leaving. So it's about 7% of the people on an annualized basis are turning over.
Yeah, the problem is it comes at one fell swoop.
All at one time, right? Yeah, it comes all at once.
That's generally the problem. Is it tends to come at one fell swoop.
If you're talking about the legislators, I mean, it's hard to compare, right? Because it's a profession that's where competition is baked in, right? You're always gonna have that. Unlike some other things we may be comparing it to, even on the staff side.
Right, and that in fact is actually, when you look at some of the differences and some of the arguments about some of the benefits, especially the retiree benefit, which the retirement benefit is relatively generous. And Philip, we'll talk about this more at the next meeting, but one of the reasons given for that is the fact that, yeah, as a legislator, you every 4 years, you're subject to being fired. And so, you don't have that choice about whether you continue or not. So you're right, absolutely right. It's not quite a perfect comparison.
Although an employee can get fired any day, so I don't have to worry once every 4 years, I guess, right?
Simon, I noticed in the exhibits that the lion's share of the exhibits are comparing Maryland to other states, and obviously that makes sense because we're talking about the state legislature. But there were a couple of late exhibits in the packet specific to county councils and local government. And it didn't look like we had as much kind of historical data in those spaces. Is that something that you were encouraged to look at recently? Is there, particularly after seeing 40 plus exhibits, like, I don't want to say like there's more work to be done on the exhibit front, but does, MACO and MML kind of keep that data and have that information? I'm just curious, like kind of how that found its way in there, and if that's something you've been increasingly asked to look at in recent years.
So I don't know if we've been asked to look at it, but I know MACO does keep all that information, and it's all on their website, which is where I sourced it from. The one problem with that data is the recent data. Some of it is missing. They've had trouble with their vendor apparently collecting the data, but there is a lot of historical data there. So if we wanted to look at more longer term trends for those local positions, we can definitely do that.
I mean, speaking historically, I don't recall. I mean, we've been asked to do various things as follow-up, which is fine. Over the years, that's not been the comparison with the locals is often not one that has grabbed it. And the other commissioners who were on last time can certainly speak for themselves, but my recollection is that's not something that really was something that generated a lot of conversation, to be honest.
Thank you.
My last question is, are we scheduled to have any testimonies from any legislators?
We haven't had any inquiries yet. I can circle back with the chair and see if anybody has subsequently reached out since we've had this first meeting. We may see somebody come in, but if there's any questions or information you're looking to seek from them, you can let us know. We can reach out and see if we can get some response.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should ask if any, solicit any, see if anybody wants to speak here. Philip, give people an opportunity. and I'm not sure if they're aware that we're meeting at this point. I assume that they were at least made aware that we had our appointments, but maybe just
Mhm.
pinging them and just confirming that they don't want to give testimony. Anybody else on the commission have any further questions?
Mr. Just circling back to one more point on the pension issue. Again, it does look more generous in comparison to some of the other multipliers, but again, there is that feature of the, I guess what you would call involuntary separation, whereas, generally speaking, an individual in the state service as an employee decides when they're going to resign or retire, whereas in the legislature, you do have that additional component where it's not necessarily up to the individual member. So they could be, leaving with 8 years of service, 12 years of service. They don't get to necessarily determine how many years of service they finish with.
And we'll be going into more detail next session around the pension, correct?
Yeah. I've had some discussions with state retirement agency. They've identified a few pieces of the plan that are kind of technical clarifications, fixes. I'm not aware of any major structural issues in terms of the system. So there's some, I think, clarification we'll look at with regard to how survivor benefits are worded in there. So typically, a member can have a survivor benefit for a spouse or other beneficiary. And there's some clarification we need on one of the options for, that's typically a 50% of the allowance passed on to the beneficiary. There is an option to do 100%. That involves some actuarial calculations to work that out, and the way the language is worded, we want to look at and just make sure it doesn't need some clarification to make it a little cleaner. And then the other main substantive provisions regarding the pension, legislative pension system as a forfeiture of benefits provision for if a member happens to be convicted of certain criminal offenses. And there's some statutory language applicable to the constitutional officers, and whether there's some features there that would make sense to add in on the legislative provision. But yeah, if anyone has any requests for follow-up, if you can't think of it now, shoot us an email. We can work on seeing what we can find.
So I'll just wrap up at least with, and people can jump in here, but I did have a couple questions. I do think it's a little challenging to put some of these numbers in context without understanding the hours commitments of each. I mean, part-time is can be pretty broad. It's a relatively small group. So it would seem like we could get some sort of estimate from that group. And I don't know if we haven't solicited it in the past, but it would seem like something that we could at least get locally just to understand kind of the annual hours commitments. And I think that helps put it in context. I know we can't get it obviously across the country, but I think that would be helpful to put it into context. And then I don't know if there was, the exhibits were all very helpful. I don't know if there's one where we could compare total compensation among the states, where we looked at salary plus benefits, whether it's a percent of benefits or something, to just look at what total comp looks like as compared to the other states would be helpful, at least for me, to put that in context as well.
We might be able to do it for a basket of states. I think doing it for all 50 is going to be a little difficult, because we'd have to understand 50 different pension systems and 50 different health systems and everything else. But we could certainly do it for a basket of states, whether you want to do it like for the ones that are neighbor states or the ones, in the ones either side of where we currently are. We could certainly try and do that.
Okay, I can take a look at the exhibits and see if there's any that stood out. I thought that I guess some of them had the percentages compared to other states, but it wasn't the full benefits package, so I could see where that challenge lies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I don't know if you could put into context, I guess a couple things. There was, you had put into context the 2007 decision not to move forward with a rate increase. Was there something in particular that the commission should know of why there was no increase this past time? Is the first question. And the second question, is there anything else that we should consider in the state budget or economically here in the state that would be important for us to know leading into the decision to help put this in context as well?
I mean, as I said, the 2006 decision was really timing. I mean, the legislature went into session right at the beginning of the Great Recession. And I think there was, Mr. Gallagher might remember that time with the governor at the time. You know, things looked good. Things didn't look so bad in November, and by January, the sky was falling in. So I think that there was generally a consensus that that was not a good time to raise salaries. I mean, and inevitably politics plays its part. I'm not going to speak to the motives of commissioners or commissions. Just generally speaking, you know, sometimes the time is right, sometimes it's not. I mean, you all have your charge, and you know, the role of the legislature when they get the recommendations. I mean, they're a political body, so I mean, there may be efforts, regardless of what you do, to make changes to compensation. As we said earlier, they can't increase their compensation. So if you don't recommend an increase, there will not be an increase. But if you do, then I'm sure there'll be efforts to reduce it. I mean, that's the process that we have set up. But in terms of the individual commissions and commissioners, I mean, the discussions last go around were based on a whole bunch of different arguments, and everything. The commission looked at every aspect of things and made the recommendations they made. In terms of the general state budget, if you'd have asked me 12 months ago how this commission was going to look, I might have told you, it might have been very simple. You'd have come in, said, we aren't going to do a thing, move on, because the state budget looked particularly bleak. For a variety of reasons, the state budget actually now looks incredibly healthy. We have a strong surplus. My department just finished its annual briefing to the fiscal committees on the state of the budget, both in the short term and in the long term. And it is a picture that is something that we have not seen in the 2 decades that I've been doing budgets. We have a very strong, healthy surplus, and our out-year budget is also very strong. So in that sense, you know, the budgetary situation in the state is very good. I know that that's not true for all people. There's within the state, there is a group of folks who are still struggling significantly, but overall our income picture and our sales tax picture has been very, very strong and much stronger than we thought.
And Simon, I think that's an important point, that there's really a tale of two groups here, some doing very well, I think, in this economy, and some not. So I think that's important to keep into context as well, as we move forward with our decision.
A question just comes to mind. I don't know if this is for DLS staff or for the prior commissioners. In the prior iterations of this commission, has the recommendation been unanimous, or is there, obviously that's the goal, but I'm just curious, like, what the history has been in terms of, getting consensus among the commission members.
Well, I can, what I remember from the last session we had, it was fairly unanimous at the end, what our recommendations were. There wasn't a lot of, there may have been someone that I forgot that took a different view, but I pretty much at the end, I believe everybody was on the same page.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and look, I mean, the Commissioner Rakowski is right. Last go around, the commission's decisions were fairly unanimous. There was one issue, I think, where it was a 8-1 split, but it varies over the years. I mean, I've seen votes 5-4s, but for the most part, these are consensus discussions, and people generally, unless there's some very deep held views, people come to a reasonable consensus on things. We generally, I mean, it's up to the chair how he wants to handle it. Of course, generally speaking, you know, you don't have to take votes unless people want to vote. You can just agree as a consensus. But if people, you know, some people genuinely think that things, you know, have a very strong opinion on something and they want to vote against a particular recommendation that the commission as a whole is making, then we'll record that and we'll note that. But otherwise, for the most part, I would say most of the decisions are a consensus.
And I think along those lines for consensus, I want to make sure that everyone's got a chance to jump in here and get their ask any questions. Those who haven't gotten a chance to speak up, anybody else want to add in some commentary? Because I think it is important that we hear from each commissioner throughout this process to make sure we're getting everyone's opinion here. But if not this session, the next two sessions we'll have time as well.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I was trying to recall, it's been a while, so I was trying to recall our decision-making process. And I do think it had to do a little bit with, you know, the budget landscape, the political landscape, the prior increase, the inflation environment. You know, I think there were a lot of factors that played into it. And just the way things appeared at the time, it seemed to be that there wasn't a need, you know, so or that it just wasn't called for. And you know, it's, you know, looking now, I mean, in my view, the situation looks a little different today than it did back then, but I was having trouble remembering all the details specifically of the rationale. I do think it is challenging. I think that particularly the nature of the job has changed. And I think, you know, there were a couple of comments to that regard in the last 4 years. And so, or the last couple of years in particular. So I think that would play into it as well. And it's hard. I mean, somebody commented that the bills have gotten more complicated and you know, the amount of time seems to be considerably more. It is hard not having any data on that particular aspect, though.
But I think the qualifications for the job have remained the same. So maybe my job has become harder, but this qualification to becoming a legislator is still the same. So when I took a look at the data, although, as Simon was saying, we're in the middle of the pack, when you remove those states that are full-time, we're towards the top of the pay scales in most of the areas. So we probably should take a look at that also. Whether it's a full-time job or a part-time job, we've agreed, I believe, because Simon was saying it's a hybrid. And so we know it's not 12 months. And so we should probably not compare against those states that are 12 months. So.
Well, I think that's where data would be helpful, because I think there would be some folks that would disagree that it's not 12 months, right? I know of some members, and maybe this isn't like any job, it's not all or 100%, but there are certainly a number of them that are working on, you know, constituent or policy or legislative matters 12 months a year. So that's where probably some of either the testimony or some of the data I think could be illuminating for the committee in terms of what actually goes into the job or the work of a legislator.
It'll be interesting if they do that, if their employer comes on and listens to what they're saying. So
I would also have to agree with that. Also, we have to look at the time, and given with the difference in technology and with constituent services and time to change, you know, we have Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, where, you know, our constituents want responses immediately. So it's not just limited to that time period. So to Marco's point earlier, I know we have that missing point on the time commitment, the data on that, but we do need also to consideration technological differences that affect their work as well.
I don't recall on the slide that compared the different states if there was anything that tied in cost of living. Like I mean, obviously, the cost of living in Maryland is different from, say, Iowa, or something like that. I'm not sure if that was tied into the one where it compared where we fell right in the middle.
So we didn't do that for this particular set of exhibits. I remember we did do that for the commission last time around. And I'm happy to try and do that again using cost of living. I would just note, and again, I'm happy to do that. I would note that the caveat on that is that, as we saw from we know from our own state, cost of living varies dramatically depending where you are within Maryland. So, but I'm happy to do that one.
I would ask the other commissioners if anyone else thinks that would be valuable.
I think it would. I think having just even a simple wage, state wage index, those are pretty accessible. And just adjusting for that wage index, I think would be, at least help put it into context, and was something that popped into my mind too. Because to Lynn Ann's point, it is, cost of living does vary across the states.
My quick review, those states that were paying the highest were the ones that typically had a full-time legislature. That's what I saw. That's an unscientific review is what that was.
Any other conversation here?
Just one thing to point out on the, if you're looking at cost of living, the Constitution does require uniform compensation. So even though, as Simon mentioned, there'll be variances, but when you're looking at that, you may need to look at the more expensive areas of the state, given that uniformity requirement.
Okay, I think unless there's any more discussion, I think we can wrap up. Philip, we have our next meeting. Do you have a date for the next meeting and time?
Yes, the next meeting is going to be Tuesday, November 30th at 1 p.m.
And then we wanted to do a live session in person if people would be agreeable to that, because there is some documents I believe we have to sign. That would be a little bit easier to coordinate in person rather than trying to run around and get signatures, correct?
Yeah, traditionally the decision meeting, we'd have the members sign off on the resolution page, for the signature page that gets compiled and submitted. We would need to do that ideally first week of January at the latest, just in terms of the time for processing the report and getting it prepared in time to do the official submission to the legislature when they start session.
So the only other one that's actually scheduled is on the 30th, and then we don't have another one scheduled after
Correct.
that. Okay.
Right.
My preference would be to try to wrap up before the holidays, if possible. I think we could probably turn around after the first or after the second meeting, and be ready for before the holidays. Would that work, Philip? Then perhaps we send out.
I think initially when we were trying to set up the meeting dates, I think one commissioner had a block of time when they were out of the country. And then another commissioner had indicated like right after that period, I think it was like the 10th through the 15th. And then another commissioner had a issue with the 16th through the 23rd.
Okay, so do you want to just target the first week of January then?
If that makes sense for everybody. It seems like, I don't know what that middle ground between New Year and into December looks like, but certainly January first week would get us there.
Okay, so
I was going to suggest probably sending out a poll. Personally, I'm flexible, but if you want to send out a poll and can arrive at an answer that way.
we can do that.
That might be helpful. So I was the one gone the 16th, but I'm actually back. I am here the 21st through the 5th. I'm gone part of the week of the first week in January. So I think it would be good to do a poll somehow.
Okay.
For the 30th, if that's going to be in person, where is that going to be?
November 30th is going to be a virtual again.
Oh, okay. I was confused. I thought you said the next one might be.
The third meeting that we're looking for a date for.
Gotcha.
And that'll be in Annapolis.
Yeah, I think that's the one where I'm out of the country. I won't be. So the December one. It was a December date.
Okay, well, we'll send around a poll and we'll propose some dates to you all. And then Philip, Simon, Jason, you'll all work on the follow-up items for us in advance of the 30th meeting. And then we'll get back together. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the other benefits, the pension plan in particular, to get some more details around that.
Sure.
Okay, with that, I will adjourn us and thank you all again for taking the time to meet here, and look forward to speaking with you all on the 30th. And I may reach out to you individually just to get some follow-up and debrief with everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.